Living in Houston, it is easy to forget just how lucky we are that we get to have beautiful tree lined streets, evergreen oak trees. I think most of us immediately think of oak trees when we think of the city, when we think of what it feels like to live in this place where we are surrounded by trees. And our incredible parks network, which has done phenomenal work in the last decades, rebuilding older parks, building new parks, building out bayou greenways, and really establishing Houston as a visibly verdant green tree city. And that takes a tremendous amount of effort, a tremendous amount of care and work, real initiatives by local neighborhoods and communities. And of course, as we can imagine, there are parts of the city that we feel that amazing greenness, those trees that surround us, and there are parts where that's far less prominent. But local organizations work hard to try to both make sure that everyone has access to that greenery and to protect and continue on the tradition of tree-lined canopy streets that help to do things like lower the temperature of those streets and absorb air pollutants and give us a beautiful place to live and exist and to kick a ball under. And so today we're sitting down with someone who is one of those organizations that works so hard and has done a tremendous amount, not just for Houston, but the greater region and really all of the state, actually, thinking about how to put more trees in the ground, build greener cities, and create a tree canopy that can last not just for the present, but into future generations. I'm Weston Twardowski, the Associate Director of Rice's Center for Environmental Studies and the Associate Director of Eco Studio and Rice's Sustainability Institute, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime to our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Barry Ward is the executive director of Trees for Houston, which has been doing work for decades, helping to make sure that all Houstonians have access to beautiful trees, not just now, but well into the future. Barry Ward, welcome to the program. Please introduce yourself for our listeners.
Absolutely. I'm Barry Ward, and I am the director of Trees for Houston and have been so since early 2008.
And tell us a little about Trees for Houston. I mean, the name is rather self-explanatory, but tell us a little bit about the organization's history and its work around the area.
Sure. So it was founded. It actually was the melding of three small grassroots tree organizations in 1983. Trees for Downtown, the Live Oak Society, and one other kind of formative group. And the idea was to plant primarily live oaks, but other trees as well, in well established neighborhoods and business corridors in a very well organized, architecturally planned manner. Think Champs Elysees. Think Paris and its sycamores, or Budapest and
Mm.
its elms, right? That's what they were thinking, and they so many of the oak trees you'll see downtown now are a result of that early work.
Hmm.
Trees for Houston was a fundamental part, along with other people and organizations that are still extant today, in getting the green corridors legislation worked and policy worked with TxDOT,
Okay.
to put in trees along the freeways. They played a lot of the uh, folks that were on these boards. They sat on the boards of the Parks Board, Trees for Houston, some other folks that aren't even around, some other organizations that maybe aren't even around anymore. Keep Texas and Keep Houston Beautiful. They all shared. There was this seminal group of individuals that shared affiliation across boards, and they got a lot of this work done. So it was rarely, if ever, just Trees for Houston doing the work back in those early days. So here we are in, what are we, 2026 now?
We are in
And
2026.
So I came on in this month in 2008. So I came on. They brought me on. Trees for Houston had gotten quite good at tree planting. They were not particularly good at project management, and they had a fairly narrow project definition of what they would work in.
Hmm.
So they hired me, and I am a kind of an interdisciplinary guy. I have a very unusual. My headspace is different, and I'm very atypical for. I consider myself to be atypical for my generation. I'm a baby boomer. Um, I like multidisciplinary approaches. I'm an autodidact,
Can you
and
tell us a
I
little just about your background? You say multidisciplinary, and one of the things we love to highlight is just the breadth of ways that people approach environmental work. So can you just tell us briefly, how you came
abs-
to this?
sure. So my academic training is as a historian, and
Hmm.
I did a bunch of language work too. But in typical fashion of how I am, I took survey work and everything. I did manage to squeak out a minor in Latin, but I took German and I took a little Spanish and I took this and that. And if there was a survey course, I went to a small liberal arts university in
Hmm.
California, California, and I took intro to everything. And that was encouraged where I went to school. We can, if you were willing to do that and spend the time and of course the money. Of course, I was on scholarship, so I didn't care. Um, I took you name it. I have a degree in history, but I took general chemistry. I took general biology. I took economics, and of course, I took art history and all of the I took survey courses of religious studies. If I could get my hands on a professor that would let me in, I would take it, and that informs both who I am and it informs how I approach my relationships with this organization, with our mission, and with the city itself and other people. It's how I'm wired at a profound level. And so I worked in a very nice small but great collection. I worked in this art museum in Northern California. I worked in a history
Hmm.
museum. I've been a curator and an archivist. I've worked in cultural and architectural preservation. Um, I've done freelance writing. Um, so if I could get my hands on it and it captured it stimulated me intellectually for more than 5 minutes, I probably tried to get my hand in it as a side hustle to also pay the rent for a little while. Whereas most of my peers were appalled by me throwing away my academic potential as they saw it. I saw it as fulfilling my intellectual patrimony. And so I was very, you might expect to hear far more young 22-year-olds say something like that than you would a 61-year-old as I do. So I didn't go to law school, didn't go to medical school, didn't become an architect. In my age group, a lot of my friends in Northern California they went into real estate, they went into finance, they went into computers. And by computers, that usually meant they went into sales and they were not designers and developers, although few were, but some made great fortunes in the industry surrounding the development of tech. And to put that into time context, I graduated from high school in '82, and I went back to graduate school in '95. So
Hmm.
I'm an interesting age group because I went to undergraduate and never touched a computer. And when I started graduate school, they told me I had to have a Mac 2C. And of course, unless you're in my age group, you wouldn't even know what that is. But it was a giant leap forward because the processing speed was 450K. K, right?
I mean,
Um,
I think still better than what we sent some spacecraft to the moon with in the 60s. So,
it's funny you say that. My next door neighbor, so I live right near NASA, so I have neighbors and friends that are quite literally, physicists. And my next door neighbor has been on the shuttle. He was a space shuttle guy. He was up 3 or 4 times. And I have another friend who she's a 15 years younger than me. She's been up 4 or 5 times now. She's a space station person. And so when I compare my conversations with the two of them, it's hilarious because the guy, the space shuttle guy who's next door to me, he's 10 years older than me. And so he trained on a slide rule.
Yeah.
Um, and that was what most of the work, of course, they had these giant IBM computers that they ran tape and they ran card profiles. I don't know if you remember or are familiar with the punch cards they ran. That's what they did. And then to put that in juxtaposition to my other neighbor, she's a chemist by academic training, but she's multi-talented. I was over standing in her front yard the other day with her husband, and we were looking at a tree that he was managing to kill while she was up in space. And his phone rings, and he answers it, and it says his wife's name on the screen. And in my head, she was supposed to be in space for 6 months, and so I don't. I'm immediately worried and wondering what happened, why she's home. And he swipes it, and she is. I'm sure it's not FaceTime, but it was the equivalent of FaceTime. She was FaceTiming us from the space station, and it was just as there was no time delay on the talk.
Mm.
So I'm standing in the front yard of somebody's house in Seabrook, Texas, having a live time conversation with somebody in space. And I'm kind of laughing to myself, and her ponytail sticking straight up. She's in, and I'm sitting there thinking, I went to college with a manual typewriter. Um, so I consider myself to be a little bit unusual. And I don't mean this. I mean it in a affinity way. Intellectually, I consider myself to be unusual, and I am all over the place in what I consider to be a good way. It doesn't mean I'm good at all of it. I hold no illusions on that.
I mean,
Um,
Trees for Houston's doing great work, so I think you've got some successes there. I want to pull us again
Sorry,
back from Space City Houston to Bayou City Houston,
I
which
don't even know how
actually
I got it. Well, you've already found out I'm chatting. So
and so I mean I think it's something interesting is for a long time actually that is a kind of a good point to turn to is we were Space City and people that was the most popular moniker in the last couple of decades. Bayou City has really gone up, and a lot of that is we see greenery, and a lot of that's been the greenways projects that you guys were involved in.
yeah,
It's been interesting to see how the city has really embraced over, I mean, it's not like there haven't been parks in Houston for a long time, but there has been a real resurgence and I think a
mhm,
real strategic effort across a wide range of groups, but certainly Trees for Houston among them,
yeah,
in maintaining and making us recognize that these are important resources for everyone who lives in Houston. So can you talk a little bit about some of those major projects that Trees for Houston has executed?
sure. So the one kind of corollary I'll put out is that excuse me, is that Trees for Houston rarely works in a vacuum. Almost everything we do is intensely related to another organization, institution, entity, whether that because we don't own dirt where trees
Mm,
are going, right? And so over time, that has varied widely. It's usually municipalities, the county, all the various cities. We work in over time. Oh, we've probably worked in 50 or 60 counties across Texas.
mm,
So we are regional. Um, but I also am very cognizant of the fact that many of our supporters have business or personal interests in places other than the greater Houston area. So when a company comes to me and says, I have oil patch business in Odessa and there's nobody there to help with this, I absolutely will export our expertise to Odessa or Corpus or Waco to help them get stuff done. I am very attached to the concept um, that the trees don't care about what your logo is or what your party affiliation is. They don't care about any of that. The environment, um, it's for all of us, and it needs to be for all of us, and it needs to be all for us, irrespective of race, income, zip code. professional affiliation, those sorts of things. And I don't say that from the position of what somebody on a more extreme political pole than I am. I don't say that from this bleeding heart kind of perspective. To me, that is just practical common sense. The, I also come from a very blue collar um, demographic. I was raised by a single mom, six kids, lived in multi unit housing my whole life. Got evicted from every domicile I ever had until I got a dorm room at a college, right? So I know exactly what it's like to live in untreated places, to places that are not green, that have no softness to them. Everything about them is built and harsh and utilitarian in a way that does not lend itself towards mental health or aesthetics. And now, to a much greater degree, we realize lending themselves towards collective and individual physical health, right? So I am very passionate about the mission conceptually. So Trees for Houston for years, it was just about planting nice trees in nice places because of very traditional board composition. They tended to go in the same 4, 5, 6 zip codes in Houston.
Mm,
Where do wealthy, affluent people who have a little time and money to run a nonprofit, where do they work and where do they live? Where do they recreate and where do they worship? Right? So you Memorial Park, Herman Park, right? Those are the parks that were getting everything. Not everything. I'm speaking in a little bit of hyperbole, but
yeah.
um, so in downtown around the towers, Post Oak, when Post Oak started getting redeveloped in a big way in the I'll say the early '90s. Um, so when I came on board, they hired me. Frankly, I don't know why they hired me. I was working as a cultural preservationist for the state of Texas. Uh, um, I didn't plant trees. What I knew about trees, you could fit in a thimble. Um, but they did hire me. And once once I got to a point where I was good enough at my job and I'd stabled I'd righted a somewhat unstable financial ship. Um, I immediately started taking some liberties with mission creep, not in the sense of what we did, but of where we did it.
Mm,
And so these days you can find or you can pay for you can use metrics all over the place and you need a certain amount of them for obvious reasons to tell you where are the poorest neighborhoods, what are the brownest neighborhoods or blackest neighborhoods, where are the income levels different, where are childhood pulmonary disease is more prevalent. You get
mm,
that data and you cross reference it, and you can see where there are no trees or green spaces. It is remarkable how it cross references. It's not necessarily causative, but it is correlative, of course, right? And so I never really needed that data to know where to plant trees. You just drive around Houston, you can see it, right? The data helps in fundraising, it helps in mission justification. Um, but initially, in 2008, we were doing that without data. Um,
mm,
in once Well, with over the various changes in presidential administrations, there's different impetuses and different boluses of dollars that come through the systems to study that stuff. Well, all of a sudden, everybody had $500,000 or $1 million to study the effects on urban trees or heat mapping places like Houston.
mhm,
Well, it had already been done privately, and we knew all that. But now all of these entities, governmental, quasi-governmental, private nonprofits are throwing charitable dollars at these studies, right? And I largely stayed out of that. I don't need to do a study. Everybody else is doing it, and I already know. So the second that data came out, though, man, I grabbed it. And that's what I use to justify um, a lot of the places where I plant. Now, it doesn't mean I won't plant other places. Memorial and Herman Parks are always my go to examples. They still need trees, and I'm happy to help if they need me. Now, they don't really need me. Um, but in the past they have, and I love working with them. They're great places. Um, but what this has done, it has enabled me. and able to justify to my board why I've been going so far afield, why I wanted to plant Elgin or
Mm,
Old Spanish Trail instead of
mm,
Post Oak or Memorial, right? And with the with the winds of social change, the porpoising of social change over time, as different ideas and concepts have more or less affinity to the broad population over time, um, things changed. And I hit a sweet spot when people wanted trees and they wanted them in areas where they weren't coming before. That fit what I wanted to do, it fit where the need was. And fortunately for me, it fit who I am as a person. So there was a certain fortuitous timing of when I came on board. Timing for me personally and my ability to do something I'm passionate about in the places where I think it matters most, but also fortuitous for the organization because it makes it easier, not easy, but easier to raise money to get these projects done. And in terms of in terms of raising the funds, year in year out, you have to. I don't know if you've ever heard the analogy in professional sports where you're only as good as your last game. That's how we are at Trees for Houston. Sometimes some of our projects, we might plant a certain neighborhood and maybe we made a bad choice in species selection, or maybe, and this happens more frequently than I like, we get pressured into doing something we quite wouldn't quite have wanted to do it that way. But infrastructure pressures, city pressures, donor pressures. Well, I really want this varietal of tree. And I'm telling them, after 20 years, I can tell you that varietal's not going to do as well. I'm saying that's what I want. That's what they get. And then they wonder why its growth rate is 50% reduced, right? So those things happen. And to regain, particularly corporate dollars every year, you have to have successful project implementation.
mhm.
And so I got very good very quickly at figuring out how to get 50 trees in the ground in 4 hours and then keep them alive for 5 years.
Wow.
So that's what we do. We are not a policy organization. There's not a human who walks into my office that doesn't have strong opinions on policy, as you can imagine. But our board is full of people with different. We all believe in the mission of trees, but there are widely divergent opinions on how to get there. I have some people that are affiliated with us that are quite conservative in many ways, and some that are quite liberal or left of center in many ways. And I have some that are just as moderate and blasé as the day is long. But we all believe in advocacy for more rather than fewer trees, and by extension, green space in general. There's nobody on my board that would say, well, I love trees, but I hate prairies, right? Everybody gets there's value and a place, a correct place for everything. And it's interesting. CenterPoint Energy, for better or for worse, and it's both. They're a giant entity with a hard job in the infrastructure sector, right? Um, and one of the things that I really like that I've glommed onto and I've adapted a little bit is this saying that they've had for years: is put the right tree in the right place.
Mm,
And that is a really good piece of advice, and I use it all the time, and I'm thankful they do that. What I've added on to it is the right tree in the right place with the right amount and type of care and maintenance, right? Because it's one of our challenges is that people don't understand. It's part of our educational thrust is tree care. People, they don't select the right tree, they don't put it in the right place, and even if they did by luck, they don't care for it properly.
mm,
You would never build uh, I don't know, a building, a garage, a home, and then think you don't have to take care of it, right? Every year, X amount of dollars is going to go into taking care of that building. Well, a mature tree in Houston might be, might be 60 feet tall and weigh 20,000 pounds,
wow.
right? And so you have that in your front yard or next to your building or next to infrastructure of some sort, and you've put $0 into maintenance to it. Imagine building, a 70-foot tree. That's a 7-story building,
Yeah.
right? So When it comes to power lines, for example, the easement from center point, I think, is maybe 20 feet, something like that, 15 feet. Well, if
Hmm.
you have a 70-foot American elm in your yard, you would have to plant it 75 feet away from every power line or transmission line to guarantee it's not going to hit anything,
Yeah.
right? So you really need to plant the right tree and you need to take care of it. And if you are a homeowner, you really need to have a well-trained and ethical arborist looking at your trees, just like every now and then you have somebody inspect your roof or your AC. You're not wise to wait till your AC breaks and then have to pay somebody to fix it in July in Houston. If you're smart, every year, every other year, you have some guy come out and he looks at it and cleans the filter and he says, "Yeah, you're in good shape for another year." Right? Or he says, "Boy, your freon's low. Let me fix that now." Or, "Boy, the compressor's making funny sound." Your car, you don't wait till a light comes on and it says your engine's frozen. You change the oil every 3,000 miles or whatever it is, right? It's the exact same thing with trees, preventative maintenance. And it's quite affordable when you do it preventatively. Now, in many neighborhoods that we go into, that's not an option. And so we deal with species wherever we can that are smaller, less prone to
Mhm.
breakage, native, they need less care, those sorts of things.
What
So
are
you
some of those species that you really think are good for folks who really are looking for something that is lower maintenance, that is, probably going to be adaptable largely throughout our region?
Sure. The big tree, the one tree that gets large, it doesn't get terribly tall, but it gets wide. That is really stable. It's strong. Its torsional and tensional strength in wood is really strong. Is the live oak.
Mm.
Um, it is drought tolerant, it's disease tolerant, it's wind tolerant. Its native range is largely coastal from the mid-Atlantic down into northern Mexico, right? Exactly where hurricanes occur in North America. And it's evolved a root zone and a wood strength and a branch structure and a morphology that tolerates very high winds, right? And so that's the big tree that probably does best. Other ones do pretty well, but they can do it by shedding and other things. Uh, Magnolias are pretty good now from a wind perspective. There are other trees that do well from a drought perspective. Cedar elms are another pretty good one that are a
Mm.
decent sized tree, and they're interesting because they're like kind of like a live oak. They can take inundation and they can take drought. Um, and so there's various ones, and we publish lists all the time. But pruning is a key part of that, and where you placed it. It's interesting. Before
Mm.
before the derecho and barrel, I probably get an email and or phone call, maybe 3 or 4 times a month, saying, "How do I stop Centerpoint from pruning my trees?"
Mm.
After barrel, I was getting 2 or 3 a day saying, "How can I get Centerpoint to please come prune my trees?" And so now Centerpoint's not perfect and people aren't perfect, right? And but one of the things, unfortunately, when Centerpoint comes through, that's a volume issue, right? If Centerpoint was going to do the kind of pruning I like done on my tree in a delicate, slow, thoughtful manner, they would spend 3 or 400 million dollars a year pruning trees, and they can't do that. They're probably, I don't know, but I'm guessing they're spending 20 or 30 million dollars a year pruning trees. So they're going through with a sledgehammer rather than a dainty tool, right? And they have to. And that's unfortunate. But on the other hand, homeowners, and we're largely talking about homeowners who should be able to get on a computer and afford a couple $100 for pruning. They really should. Uh, they really should be doing better on preventative tree care. Um, so there's species out, and there's smaller stuff too. There's nice native or non-native if you want something horticultural but non-invasive. There's some other stuff out there that you can plant that'll never threaten your foundation. They'll uh, never threaten your roof, those sorts of things. But it's funny. People have very different levels of risk aversion when it comes to trees. I'm somewhere in the middle. There are some people, one time in 1993, a branch from an oak tree hit their car, or the roots of a pine tree buckled their driveway, and they will
Mm.
not tolerate anything but a 3 foot plant in their yard anymore. And there are other people who will ride a dangerous, dying, shedding tree that's over their roof line. They'll die it till the last speck of green leaf is gone from that tree. And most of us are somewhere in the middle. So the key is to get a certified arborist out there to take a look at your trees every now and then if they're big. Um, but you can do it safely. There's never a complete guarantee. The healthiest tree in the world sometimes just falls and you never know why. And sometimes I'll see sick trees and I'm like, man, I wouldn't live near that thing. And that thing goes on for 10 years. But and that happens, and that's happened. I've seen that happen myself. But usually, if you've been around this business long enough, you get a pretty good idea, um, uh, of what a tree's going to do. One time, I was looking at there was a Montessori school that bought a satellite campus. It was a house out on Northeast Houston, and they were buying it for an experimental kind of hands-on garden and nature exploratory place. And I went out there and I met them. And as we were walking out the gate, when we were done surveying the property, I noticed a very large, probably a 50-year-old crepe myrtle. Big, beautiful thing. And I took one look at that. It was very close to the house and very near the only walkway back to this property. And I took one look at that and I was like, man, that thing is dangerous. If you're going to have kids here, you need to get rid of that. And
Mm.
it was big and it was green. It was flushed out in leaves. And they're like, oh, we can't get rid of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's weird. Well, I get in the car and I wasn't 3 minutes down the road. I get a phone call and they're like, you're not going to believe it. That tree fell over the second you were around the block. And so if I could make that happen every time I say something smart that somebody doesn't believe me, I'd be a millionaire.
So I think it's great we've talked some about the importance of care, which I think is one of the things that folks who maybe are a little familiar with Trees for Houston do know. You plant all around the Houston area, and as you've indicated, beyond. Just to throw out a couple of stats, in 2024 to 2025, you planted almost 30,000 trees in green spaces, distributed over 60,000 trees. There were
Correct.
11,000 trees at 65 schools.
Hmm.
And over 60 parks that you helped put trees in. So, I mean, you're really all over thinking about schools, thinking about parks, thinking about public greenways. And I mean, that kind of breadth of work is so critical in
Yeah.
fostering that canopy. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit both about some of that work. I know you guys do tree giveaways all the time. I get emails about those. I know there's some of the education that you've done, but there's
Mhm.
also, I think you're a really vital part of building up the tree canopy of our region. And I'd love to hear you talk a little about why that matters beyond just, yes, there's aesthetic value in trees. Of course,
Sure.
I think most of us love the importance of, just as you mentioned earlier, feeling those kind of soft spaces that greenery add. But there's other benefits as well that would be great if you could just touch a little bit on why these different places and this range of programming that all goes to that mission of making this a much greener and stronger canopy.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things that people need to understand is that if you're up in, say, Huntsville and you're in the Sam Houston State Forest, right? Those trees, if we all went away and we never did anything, that's those trees as individuals and the forest as a collective have a life cycle. And they come and they go and they regenerate. And sometimes there's lower canopy and sometimes there's higher canopy. And it's complex and it is a web and it is a mathematically chaotic system, but it works and it functions and it reproduces itself over many, many, many millennia, over epochal time. The whole palette can change and it can go from grassland to forest. And so you can expand it even further. But nature takes care of itself. And what was once an inland sea may now be a desert, which may now be a prairie, which may now be a forest. And that may seem like, what the hell are you droning on about, right? It's important to realize that these cycles exist even though we don't are not around long enough to see them, right? And so what you have to realize when you are living in the built environment is all of that ceases because of our intervention, right? In a negative way. So we also have to intervene to keep what little space we have left for these things going.
Mm.
So if nobody ever plants a tree again in Houston, there will be no more trees in Houston. They'll all go away, right? So there may be a volunteer sweet gum along a fence row somewhere or a sycamore, and then somebody's going to cut along and cut and come along and cut it down because it's in the wrong place or something, right? Urban forestry is 100% dependent on human intervention for replanting. It does not exist, right? Without us. So the numbers you mentioned of what Trees for Houston has accomplished in the last 2 years, that makes us by order of magnitude the largest non-governmental tree planting entity in North America. Now
Wow.
there are some entities like say the Arbor Day Foundation or American Forest. They're doing stuff and they do a lot of trees. They're doing reforestation. They're also doing policy. They're using government dollars. We only use private dollars and we just plant trees in the urban space. And so within that parameter, we're doing 10 to 15 times what the next sized organization is doing. And so you have to be highly focused on that aspect of the mission, and you have to be willing to grind through the multiple, often Byzantine layers of multiple organizations, agencies, municipalities to get permission to do this. It's really hard. By far, the hardest thing I do any day of the year is get permission to plant. It's very challenging and very difficult. And so, uh, you work for the radio station
I work for Rice University.
for Rice. Okay, well that's a great example. Rice is a beautiful campus and it's reasonably well treated. Go down tomorrow to grounds and try and get permission to plant a tree. And and often the reasons they say no are very good, very reasonable reasons. Especially at Rice, they know where every tree is, and but often they're not. But they will come out, especially people who take care of grounds and infrastructure. They will come up with 100 reasons in 10 seconds on why you can't plant a tree on their property, right? And oftentimes at a place like Rice, where there's a lot of kind of forward thinking, I'll use the word progressive, and I mean that in a good way, minds, um, uh, people within the infrastructure understand that the people who are asking for more green space think that way. So they will couch their no in broad, soft terms, when the reality is they don't want to mow around it. They don't want to blow more leaves. That drops pine needles. I don't like that. Right? Pollen comes off and people have to clean their car more. You would not believe the no's that I get. I had the head of all of infrastructure and facilities for Clear Creek Independent School District tell me to my face, without any thought that he was, no animosity, but without any thought that he was being part of the problem. He goes, I would much rather cut a tree down than put one in on one of my campuses. Right? Students be damned, health be damned, right? Climate be damned. And you don't even have to, you could think that climate change is a total hoax. They don't, it has nothing to do with that. It all has to do with how much easier or harder do I perceive a tree as making my job.
Mm.
There is, and it's probably not surprising that most people are not looking at a big picture where there is a positive cascade effect. If you plant a nice shade tree on the south or west side of a building in Houston, you are reducing the power usage of that building, right? Well, that has positive effects, and now there's fewer carbon-based energy sources used to cool that building. You're saving them money. It's the obvious aesthetic benefits. There are not quite negligible, but very, very small incremental increases in health and mental health and physical health and in environmental habitat from that. But collectively, well, we did 35,000 trees last year. Now it's not incremental anymore. Now it's not near negligible. It's 35,000 trees worth of incremental increase in all of those benefits. So get the guy who mows the lawn at a school campus to buy into that. It's virtually impossible. You've got to hammer your way through. And it's interesting. Oftentimes elected officials, they love me because I give them free stuff, right? And they when was the I mean in this day and age, even far right politicians typically like trees. Yeah, that's green space. That's great. My voters love trees. Steve Raddick, do you know who Steve Raddick is?
Yeah.
So Steve Raddick told me once, he goes, Barry, trees are votes. Trees are the same as votes. And I'm like, that's good enough for me. And so man, that guy planted trees like nobody's business. Nobody would accuse him of being moderate, right? He's right of center, way right of center. That guy did more for the collective environment than 95% of every other elected official in Harris County history, right? Now, why he did it, I don't care, right? We got him in the ground. So getting that stuff through for every guy like Steve Raddick, now he was at the elective level, his guys who are running the parks or the guy who has to do the budget for buildings, they don't see energy savings from a tree. They see that's an extra hour per week in the fall that I got to blow leaves, right? So principals at schools, if you gave every principal their own budget to deal with and said, here's is, and I showed them that you could save 20 grand a year by planting a few pine trees outside of your building, and they could use that on whatever they wanted, they'd all have me planting trees. The
Yeah.
problem is it's not their money. They view it as not their money and it's not their problem. It's a centralized budget problem that doesn't care and can't and doesn't have the language or the skill set to create a narrative as to why you should put trees in for practical reasons, not
Mm.
just because you're a warm, fuzzy leftist um, ecologist that wants more green stuff, because that's how a lot of people view us, right? And some of us are like that, right? I tend to be far more utilitarian and I tend to be far more dollars oriented than many of my peers. But that being said, um, the warm fuzzy side of it is still important, right? And so that's the world that I navigate through. I navigate through elected officials who outwardly say, we love parks and we love green space and we love trees. And then quietly they're saying, God, don't plant trees near my sidewalks. I don't want to have to ever do concrete again. Right. And so, and then you have an oftentimes, not always, but sometimes misinformed public that thinks you have to save every single tree, when in reality, they have a lifespan. And sometimes, if 30 years ago, the head of the HOA planted the wrong tree in a space that was too small underneath power lines, well, those trees are going to be butchered and they're never going to be healthy and they should be moved. But people can't get their well-intended people can't allow themselves to remove a tree.
Yeah.
And those are counterproductive efforts at saving trees. And so that's the world I have to navigate through to try and get permissions to plant trees. And then you'll have somebody who says, well, I was a kid once and my magnolia didn't do well. Therefore, all magnolias don't do well, right? They have a data set of one, right? That's an anecdote. That's not data. And you get the same thing on the you get that with all people, with irrespective of their political affiliation, if you will. Um, they'll take what they feel and they turn that into a blanket statement on what they perceive as is. And of course, that's not the world I live in or work in. So efficacy becomes important to me, but so I have to get it right whenever possible, as much as possible. I got to get the species right. I've got to get the size right. I've got to spend the dollars wisely. My 990s are, of course, public. And so anybody smart enough to give me, to have earned a lot of money that they can now afford to give me, is smart enough to read my 990s and see if I'm efficient or not. So if you read my numbers on the 990, you see we work in the black. You see that we get a lot of trees in the ground. If you read my 990s compared to the average regional tree NGO, you're thinking, my God, how are these people doing it? Um, um,
Well, we're rapidly running out of time. Sorry, but I want to give you a chance for folks who are interested in that work. How can they learn more about Trees for Houston? How can they get involved?
well, we have myriad volunteer opportunities, as you can imagine, and we have volunteer opportunities that are kind of all over the map, literally all over the region and half the state. And then we also have different types of opportunities for what you can do. I have people who want to work out and want to come out and work in our little tree farm and in our garden. I have people that would just want to plant trees. We have a very active educational program, both in schools and on our campus, where we bring kids in. And so there's educational opportunities to teach kids about various, about trees, about plants, about fruit trees, about the environment. There's all kinds of opportunities for that. And then as a small nonprofit that tries to run lean, we are always trying to get people with intellectual or professional expertise that is hard for me to pay for. So there's lots of opportunities. We are online, obviously, and you can always give me a call. My phone number's on the website. Give me a call. Let's chat, and we'll figure out where to plug you in. And if it's not with me, I can direct you to an entity that also does good work that might better fit an individual's particular skill set and affinity.
That's great. And the website you mentioned is
Now
Trees
we'll go to our
for
researcher, Sophia, who
treesforhouston.org.
is another in her
Barry
series of
Ward, thank you so
pieces
much for your
on
time.
local
Thanks for
flora
talking
and
with us. It's
fauna
been a
around
delight getting to
Houston.
learn more
Critter
about
Corner.
Trees for Houston.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's Sophia, and welcome back to Critter Corner, where we dive into Houston's fascinating wildlife. In each episode, we feature experts and enthusiasts who share their favorite local flora and fauna, the role in our ecosystem, and finally, ways that we can all support our community's biodiversity. For this episode of the series, we have special guest Robby Robinson, a fields operation manager at Buffalo Bayou Partnership, who will be talking about the wildlife of Buffalo Bayou as a whole. Welcome to the show, Robby.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. Glad to talk to you. To start off, can you tell me a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I work for Buffalo Bayou Partnership. We're a nonprofit that we are revitalizing the Buffalo Bayou and bringing it back to life. And that's our mission is we're the stewards of Buffalo Bayou, building green spaces and connecting the bayou to the city. My personal part of this is I run the Cleaning Green program, and there's six of us, and we're out on the water every day, and we're basically glorified trash men. We clean the bayou. That's what we do.
And now, can you tell us about what species you'll be talking about today and why it might be special to you?
Well, I'm really not talking about any one species versus all of the species.
Okay.
People really aren't aware that how full of life Buffalo Bayou is, and it is full of wildlife. I mean, literally. So that has changed from the past. Before, at one point, Buffalo Bayou was one of the most polluted waterways in the United States. And the 1972 Clean Water Act changed everything. And now, at least in the upstream of the port, anyway, is mainly what I'm talking about. Is there's no municipalities dumping any sewage in the bayou anymore. There's no industry dumping any chemicals, and it's as clean as the street runoff will allow it to be, which day in and day out would really surprise you that the water is clean. So anything that was ever here has come back. In the 60s, the water was literally dead. There was nothing living in it. And now anything that was ever here has come back. We have 18 different species of fish. Officially, we actually have more than that unofficially. some invasive species and some saltwater species that can live in freshwater they don't include, and just everything. We have everything from tiny little minnows to the bull shark in Buffalo Bayou, and the alligator snapping turtles, which are endangered species, they were thought to be extinct, and we actually have one of the healthier populations of alligator snapping turtles that's known about. And yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear that a lot of those species are able to come back to the bayou. And I'm hoping that you can elaborate a bit on some of the important roles that these species that have been reintroduced play in our local ecosystems.
Yes, well, they haven't really been reintroduced. They have just come back on their own. I don't really know of any species that were reintroduced. They've just found that as soon as the water got clean enough for them to live in, they made their way back. And that's kind of what's exciting to me about it, is that even though we can manage to screw things up pretty bad, that we don't really have to do anything but clean our act up, and all the animals come back and create a healthy ecosystem, which in turn is healthy for us.
I'm wondering if there are any surprising facts about any of these species that people might not know, maybe that you find particularly interesting.
Surprising fact. Well, I just find it really surprising that in the Buffalo Bayou runs through the middle of downtown Houston. And literally in the middle of downtown Houston with skyscrapers on both sides, I've seen otters swimming, I've seen beaver swimming, I've seen, egrets pulling a fish out of the water. I see a big alligator gar roll on the water. And it's just amazing to me that they can thrive in the midst of all that hustle and bustle. But they do.
What are some simple ways that people can support these animals through either the Buffalo Bayou Partnership or any other organizations?
Well, if you want to support through the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, you would come volunteer with us. Like I said, we're out there 5 days a week, you know, 52 weeks out of the year cleaning up. And so we do have a volunteer program where you can get a group of people and come volunteer with us and see what we do and see the wildlife and get a feel for the city from the water, which is a really unique experience. But aside from that, the main thing that you can do is just pay attention to what you do with your trash. But the people don't realize that when they throw a bottle out or they see some paper on the street and they just think, that it just it goes out of their mind. Well, all of that ends up in the bayou. Unfortunately, the bayous, Buffalo Bayou anyway, drains 213 square miles of urban streets. And so just one bottle, one cup on every other street, and they collect in the storm drains. And then when it rains, it's terrible what comes down the bayou. And even though we do our best, we just get a fraction of, the trash that comes down, and it ends up in the bayous, and it ends up eventually in the Gulf, and then it makes it into one of the big gyres. There's 5 gyres, which are basically big swirling balls of water in the different oceans, and the Pacific gyre is the biggest. And believe it or not, it's twice the size of Texas and a quarter of a mile deep of floating plastic. So it's really important not to litter.
Yeah, you're right. And the real change is going to come from all of us working together. Robby, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about some of the fascinating species that are now able to be found again in Buffalo Bayou. It's really great work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in, and make sure to come back soon to learn more about these fascinating local species.
That's our show for this week. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081 or email us at westonT@rice.edu. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, as well as the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio, produced by Weston Twardowski and Joseph Campana. Original music by Carter Dean. Research support provided by Sarah Tabrez and Arntara Varma and Sophia Soltes. Stay tuned for No Expectations with Marcus Fringe here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.